Yeah, recording will start. Fine. Okay, shall we start?
Yep.
I think we can. So, good afternoon, all of you. Welcome to this webinar on GHG, greenhouse gases, sponsored by both Consultants Consortium of Chennai CCC as well as Management System Consultants Consortium, which is Pan India Association. So we both are organized this program, and I welcome the three speakers, Mr. Mayuresh, Mr. Kaviraj, and Mr. Vinay. And I am happy to be associated with Mr. Atul Mathur, who is the Pan India GC Council representative. I'm the secretary of CCC. I'm also a member of GC. So let me start with my presentation. I will ask Mr. Mathur to join me, and then we will take it forward. So this is the presentation about Pan India MSC. We have just started, so there is a synchronization between CCC and MSCC. So I request Mr. Atul Mathur to take over the two slides of MSCC, please, sir.
Thanks, Shrikant. So the Management Systems Consultants Consortium is now being initially launched for Pan India kind of an activity, and where the whole premise is to promote management systems. Now, the facet, or I would say, we aspire that we need to have a voice at the ground level, and not only to a single platform, but multiple platforms, where we are talking about agnostic of any sector or domains. And the whole premise is to understand, not only just to achieve, but we need to elevate our standards of excellence and also of quality of services. With respect to the information, there should be a free flow of exchanges, and also we need to have certain value additions that we need to comprise. So the whole premise that we had started for the MSCC is in a nutshell, and it's been, of course, registered as a national organization. But again, we need to not only just cater to certain sectors and domains, but we have a desire that we should bring about a certain change. So it's a more of a ongoing workshop that we always try to be. And when we're talking about the consortium in large, we're talking about not only just management system consultants, but we are comprising a lot of IT or marketing, branding, or financial consultants. We would like to approach all the various sector-specific consultants into the fold. And thereby, we need to bring all these allied consultants onto one platform so that we can address to us jointly to any kind of a pan-India level that we're looking at. Now, as an organization of MSCC, we have now established this platform of free learnings, where it's an opportunity for all the people. Now, primarily, we are existing through a WhatsApp group that we had started way 2-3 years back. But we will now be also promoting to our websites and to social handles, where we'll be continuing our work towards education and, of course, the other aspects of the other cross domains. Yeah, over to you, Shrikant.
Yeah, thank you. So from Chennai Consultants Consortium of Chennai, it's an association. As it's a registered association, we are a legal entity. We are located in Tamil Nadu, which is in India. And it's a platform for basically the management consultants plus all the other businesses associates who are in different sectors. So it's a sector agnostic consultants and small, medium, and other business with a diverse range of services. And we are working very closely with the industry platforms, because our motive is to educate the industry about the standards, certifications, and other regulations. So we have governing council members, who are very senior in the profession and connected with the industry. And these are I am the secretary, Mr. Ram Kumar is the vice president, and Giridharan is the treasurer. And the same thing we are establishing with the Pan India Association also. Consultants Consortium of Chennai started in 2018. So we are there since before COVID, and we did a lot of programs. And you can see, visit our website, and you will get to know what are all we have been doing. So basically, this program is an outline. I just got from Mr. Anil Juari. We should thank Mr. Anil Juari for the excellent coordination. He said he was joining at 3:30.
Okay.
So the purpose of this webinar is to apprise the industry on how to quantify their emissions or undertake projects for emissions reduction using the international standards. So basically 14064, the standard which we are talking. And the options available in the voluntary carbon market, earn carbon credits, and how the emission statements or projects can be validated using third party. And also by measuring, reporting, and verifying the greenhouse gas emissions, how companies can identify areas for improvement and set reduction targets. So basically, it is a KPI. So carbon accounting is also an important component of ESG, because now ESG has taken a very primary focus, as we were discussing just before the program. So providing investors with a quantitative measure of a company's environmental impact. So this is the purpose of this webinar. Now I would like to introduce the first speaker, Mr. Vinay Deodar. He's a director of Clean Tech Solutions, and he's a certified energy auditor and manager by BE and Goel. He has more than 40 years of experience in the chemical industry, banking and consulting, and climate change mitigation, project development, and finance. He has managed bilateral, multilateral funding programs for energy, environment, climate change, project development, and finance. He has managed 3 bilateral programs funded by the United States aid program in the field of innovate energy technologies, SPACER, and climate change supplement of GEP and clean technology initiative. He was a member of UNFCCC, so CDM GB's registration and issuance team, accreditation panel, and methodology desk reviews. He has led the team of international consultants under the ADB carbon market program, and currently providing technical assistance for the energy transmission mechanism of the ADB, and serving a member of the regulatory committee of VCM Global Carbon Council. Mr. Vinay Deodar, you can take over from here, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm happy, and I thank Chennai Consultants and MSBC for giving me this opportunity to present before you the status of the voluntary carbon markets. There are, of course, in the last about 15 years, there is a lot of movement in this. India has also done a lot in terms of climate change mitigation projects, especially under CDM. Out of almost more than 8,000 projects, India has around 20% projects which are registered under the clean development mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. So India has had a great share of and experience under the climate change program. So let me share my presentation. Yeah, just a brief about Clean Tech Solutions. It is a proprietary concern, and we work with various consultants. We join hands with individual as well as companies, and specializing in cleaner techno-commercial solutions with a thrust on implementable, effective, affordable solution options, which are dealing with cleaner production technologies, clean energy projects, waste to energy, carbon finance, and development of, we used to do under 14,000 some time back. We also support solid waste and wastewater treatment projects and climate finance solutions. So before going to the jumping into the VCM as such, let us take, what is the status of industries in India. And as I told you, about 1,600 projects which have been registered, they are primarily from the larger industries. Of course, there are some medium scale industries which have also registered projects under CDM. So the major, sector that is lagging behind is the MSMEs. Industrial sector in India, as you all know, that consumes about 41% of the total energy, and of which MSME's share is 30%. So they are large in number, but smaller in size. So overall, their contribution is also very large. India, the consumption of energy by MSMEs is close to 1,000 million megawatt hours, which is quite significant. MSME sector is crucial for Indian economy, as the gross value added by the sector as a whole is around 30%. And moreover, MSME sector offers a huge employment potential. So it's very, very crucial that MSMEs, take actions on, energy, because right now many of them follow non-commercial forms of primary energy. Many MSMEs, emission profile, if you see the MSMEs, many are highly polluting, and mainly due to the age-old technologies that are not very efficient. The estimated GHG emissions from MSME sector is around 110 million tons of CO2 every year. And only 16% of the MSMEs, I understand, are financed by formal banking institutions. Otherwise, they are all limited to some different forms like family funding and small agencies which are funding them. Thus, there is a large scope of for low carbon technologies in all subsectors of MSMEs. Many of these projects in MSMEs can be structured as carbon offset projects and gain from voluntary carbon markets, because as you know, clean development mechanism under CDM, which was the compliance market, which was useful for India, from 2020, the end of year 2020, it is not accepting projects. So before the new mechanism under Paris Agreement kicks in, the voluntary carbon markets is a very, very good option for industries to support projects. Now, which are the sectors in which you can envisage projects, MSMEs? Mainly there are energy projects, energy distribution, energy demand side projects. Manufacturing industries obviously is major source. Chemical industry, mining and mineral production, metal production, fugitive emissions from fuels, solvent uses, and waste handling and disposal. Of course, there are projects possible from agricultural sector as well as forestry and other areas, which I have not included because they are not so very common in MSME. So, what is the importance of mitigation technologies as such? The main reason for lack of access for mainstream banking sector in MSME is the low credit worthiness. So there not many banks are ready to invest into small industries. This is leading to a inefficient equipment, and therefore the cost of manufacturing is maybe also high, as well as there will be a lot of emissions coming from the MSME. This is a kind of a vicious cycle, and this can be broken with the use of carbon finance. I'm not saying that carbon finance can be a major funding source for projects, but it can definitely be, a seed finance for, jumping into the higher technologies. Carbon markets are basically of two types. There is compliance market, or what is called as cap and trade market, and voluntary carbon markets. So cap and trade market, there is a cap set on some of the industry, some of the stakeholders, and they are given an option to either do it with their own funding in their own premises, or they can support projects outside and take the credits from those projects and to meet their requirements. So this is a general, operation of the cap and trade mechanism. Like for example, in CDM, we had cap on the Annex 1 countries, and they had to reduce their emissions by 5.2%. And this, they could have done it with different mechanisms, including CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, where they can support projects in developing country and purchase the credits for the projects that they are supporting. So in the cap and trade, which can be fulfilled by curtailing own emissions or purchasing emissions. In case of VCM, the emission reductions from offsets generated are purchased by private companies, NGOs, governments, and individuals. Their motive could be different based on their requirements. So both the markets cater to the emission reductions and carbon removal projects also. So just is a brief, these are the top VCMs. I'm not listing all VCMs because there are several voluntary carbon markets at the moment operating. The major ones are the VERA, the Verified Carbon Standard, and then there is a gold standard for global goals. There is the American Carbon Registry, the Climate Action Reserve, which is in the Western US, then Global Carbon Council, which is based in MENA, and Plan Vivo, which is mainly for sequestration. So out of these projects, they have, which I could say Vera and Gold Standard are the larger ones, where more than 2,000 projects have been funded, and they have also including a large number of projects from India as well. So these are the two major markets. The American Carbon Registry and Climate Action Reserve, there is no single project from India, but there are projects from different countries other than USA also in these two. And the Global Carbon Council, which is the latest, recently set up mechanism, which has come about in the last about 5 years or so. There are 31 registered projects, of which 9 are registered from India, but there are a lot of projects in the pipeline. And in Plan Vivo, there are 28 projects, basically restricted to forestry and sequestration. Even there, one project has been registered from India. This is from, I think, from Assam, Northeast India. So let's run through the characteristic of different, the voluntary carbon markets quickly. The Verified Carbon Standard is registered as a non-profit corporation under laws of District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. VCS is also referred to as VERA. The version 1 was established in the year 2007 and has been revised several times. And the current version, I believe, is the 4th version. VCS has 5 different standards covering the different focus areas. These are, I think, they even cover plastics, standards as well. The VCS issues verified carbon units called VCUs, and each is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2e equivalent, and it covers sectoral scopes mainly covered under CDM, including CCS, the carbon capture and storage. You can check this on their website, which I've given here. The VCS has approved its own baseline monitoring methodologies covering wide range of project categories. And in fact, today morning only I had a meeting with one of the VCS executives, and he said that now they do not directly take methodologies from CDM, but they approve it under their own scheme with their own terms and conditions, and then only this can be utilized. It has also project modules and project tools, just like CDM has some tools, methodological tools. And in addition, VCS project can also apply some CDM methodology. So you can get more information from the vera.org website. Next is the global standard for gold standard for global goals. Shortly, it is referred as gold standard. It was established in 2003 by WWF and other international NGOs. It is a not-for-profit organization headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. So it is a EU-based organization and managed by a foundation board. So GS follows 2-step process involving the certified project design and certified project. GS certified project. So it covers again all the CDM sector scopes, and GS has developed its own methodologies also, and GS also accepts program of activities just like CDM, and GS has developed own methodologies as well as accept selected CDM methodologies or their versions which are approved by gold standard. So you can visit gold standard. Now here in the last 4 or 5 years, they have Gold Standard and Vera. They have, restricted the basically the renewable energy projects from countries which are not non-LDC LDCs. So projects from India, China, and larger developing countries are no more accepted by these two programs. The Global Carbon Council, as I said, was set up recently, and it is first and the only VCS program based in MENA and Doha and Qatar. GCC governing structure includes advisory board, regulatory committee, steering committee, and a carbon registry, and they have a secretariat. GCC accepts methodologies tools approved by CDMAB with its own specification, as well as methodologies developed and approved by it. So there are few methodologies they have recently developed and approved. It has developed a comprehensive framework that includes a program manual, requirement and procedural documents, as well as the standards for project and sustainability verification and environmental and social aspects, etc. So you can get more information on GCC from their website globalcarboncouncil.com. In India has recently, this is since 2015, the network of for conservation of forests, mainly forestry projects were taken. NCCF was established in January 2015 as a registered society. It has developed first ever Indian scheme for forest certification endorsed by the PEFC. In 2020, it established a carbon registry India with its own rules and requirements for design, development, inclusion of projects and new methodologies. CRI covers projects from all sectoral scopes under CDM. It is governed by a governing council and administrative structure which oversees the day-to-day functioning. CRI has an advisory board of internal and external experts. And more you can learn from this website, cri.nccf.in. The proposed Indian carbon market, as recently formulated, it was in April 2023. The Government of India issued notification on the Indian carbon market (ICM), and in June 2023 issued more about its structure. ICM is a national framework established with to reduce and remove or avoid greenhouse gas emissions from the Indian economy. It has two components basically. So this is basically drawn from the policy paper that was issued by BEE. There is a phase 1, which is a project-based offset scheme for non-obligated and non-energy sectors, and there phase 2 there will be a compliance mechanism for obligated entities, an extended PAT scheme based on the greenhouse gas emission target. As you know, the program Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme, PAT scheme, which was promoted by BE ever since the Energy Conservation Act was signed, and also the RPO scheme, the Renewable Purchase Obligation schemes, which are introduced by the CERC and they are monitored by the state level SERCs. These existing schemes will continue to operate, but there is some unsold certificates and RECs which can be converted into carbon credits for purchase by the non-obligation entity. So eligibility criteria and additionality criteria and factors for conversion of these certificates to equivalent carbon credits is expected to be developed very soon. The BE will be administrator, CERC will be the regulator, and Grid Controller of India will be the registry for the ICM. And there will be a national steering committee and a technical committee under the ICM. In fact, I believe BE is holding workshops today or tomorrow, I think, in Mumbai. And they also already held one workshop in New Delhi. So that's for more information and understanding the people's and their general public views on this. So obligated entities shall be issued carbon credit certificates for their achievement in reducing the GHG emission intensity exceeding the target set for them. So this is all in preparation of India's net zero target, which is going to be by 2070, which is to be achieved. But of course, the preparatory steps are already initiated by. And as you know, the Paris Agreement has an mechanism in the Article 6.4, which is actually a equivalent of CDM under the Paris Agreement. It is expected to be similar to CDM, but without any differentiation between the parties, because under Kyoto Protocol there was an obligation on Annex 1 countries and non-Annex 1 countries were supportive of projects, whereas here in Paris Agreement all parties are having their own commitments have to be made, and they have been made, and those have to be met. So there is no differentiation in the Paris Agreement. So additional provisions for baseline methodologies covering requirements for the Paris Agreement specified in the RMP. So the rules, modalities, and procedures which were approved at the third meeting of the CMA, the meeting of parties for Paris Agreement, they had approved these RMPs, and a very crucial paragraph under that specifies that the baseline methodologies will encourage ambition over time. They will be real, transparent, and conservative, credible, and below the business as usual. They will avoid leakage where applicable and recognize suppressed demand. So this is these are the new things also coming in. Then align with the long-term temperature goals of the Paris Agreement, contribute to equitable sharing of mitigation benefits between the participating parties. This is a new requirement under the Paris Agreement and in respect of each participant party, and contribute to the reducing emission levels in the host party and align with NDC, and of course the ambition of reducing, curtailing, and improving the goals of the NDCs also will be looked at and incorporated in this. So the supervisory body of this mechanism has made a good progress. As a matter of fact, the supervisory body meeting is going on at the moment in Bonn. So, which are the typical climate change mitigation projects that can be thought especially by the MSMEs? Renewable energy or energy efficiency. Renewable energy, solar PV, solar thermal, wind, small hydro, biomass, thermal, biodiesel, etc., etc. Now, as I mentioned earlier, only GCC at the moment accepts renewable energy projects from India. Energy efficiency improvements in industry buildings, waste heat, and energy recovery. Maybe I think green buildings can be also projects can be also covered. The electric vehicles charged with renewable energy, supply side energy efficiency improvements, solid waste, which covers aerobic composting, landfill, methane recovery and reuse, then methane recovery from wastewater treatment, green hydrogen, which is going to be taking off very soon, and that is if it is done from biogas with generated from waste treatment. Then in agricultural sector, there will be a number of projects which can be possible. For example, energy efficient pumps and motors, then methane recovery by adjusted water management in rice cultivation, or even forestry projects, which can be eligible under all these VCMs or even the compliance schemes. So these projects can be thought about by the MSMEs as well. Now, there are certain important things which have to be kept in mind, because often we get queries whether we can register a project which we already implemented. Now, this is not possible under any of the programs. So there are certain key things that the industry should remember and take care to start with this. So the projects must demonstrate prior consideration of carbon revenue for decision to undertake it through the official documents, that is board resolutions or any other documents that are followed by these organizations. The projects must demonstrate additionality as required by the applicable baseline methodology. The host country approval, if demanded, some programs require the host country approval, a letter of approval from the country's approved authority. Then project documents adhering to the methodology, emission reduction estimation, monitoring framework to be prepared by and validated by the validation verification bodies, and local stakeholder consultation is essential, and meeting of sustainable development goals. So these are the essential prerequisites of the climate mitigation projects that have to be kept in mind while developing the project. So with this, I will stop, and I will be very glad to take questions as and when, if those which the participants may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vinay. It was a wonderful insight into the voluntary carbon markets with the various schemes like VERA, Gold Standard, Climate Action Reserve, Global Council, and other things. Also, the verified carbon standards, which are all very new to us, and that's good. Indian carbon market also we have touched upon, and various schemes available. Thank you so much for the insight. Now, question and answer session will be at the end of the session, and those who wants to ask any question can park it in the chat, or they can raise their hand at the end of the session. Okay. So with this, now we will move on to the second speaker. So we welcome Mr. Mayuresh Sarang, who is the Managing Director of Renew Climate, based in Bonn, Germany. And he's a UNFCCC technical expert to undertake technical analysis of national communications biennial reports. He has done MSc Engineering in Waste Management plus a chemical engineer. He has more than 30 years of experience, 15 years in UN bodies and other multilateral organizations like UNFCCC, UNIDO, UNEP, DTU, UNDP, and World Bank, including in design, development, and implementation of policy and regulatory standards for various sectors of the economy in collaboration with industry practitioners and stakeholders. He has accomplished private sector experiences in originating and successful operational of support to various regions in Europe, USA, East Africa, Middle East. I think all over the world, he has delivered his expertise. Facilitation of support to a global carbon market project-based mechanism, clean development in its entire project cycle, including accreditation process and methodological development, project implementation, and climate policy advice. He has provided active support and involvement with intergovernmental climate change negotiations for mitigation and adaptation actions on behalf of UNFCCC, as well as the African Group. He is currently facilitating projects, programs to design strategies and pathways to shape low emission development strategy, which is a compliance and voluntary carbon market, including to working jointly with Renew Climate's European partners to identify means to achieve and direct international climate finance for Asian and African projects. Welcome, Mr. Mayuresh. Please, you can share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, good evening to all the participants. I am also thankful for Vinay for giving us a brief on the various voluntary carbon markets and how they shape the current, the dialogue that I will have now, or discourse I will have on lines of how to implement possible projects, which would be reference to ISO 14064 Part 1 and Part 2. Just to give you a brief on the, one moment.
Mayuresh, one small request.
Yeah.
I request all the speakers to switch on the video so that we can take pictures. Mr. Vinay and Mr. Kaviraj. Mr. Vinay? We'll just take a picture. Yeah. Arti, please take a picture. Sir, go ahead, sir.
Done, sir.
Done. Go ahead, sir.
Can everybody see my presentation? Just to confirm.
Yes, boss. Go
Yes.
ahead.
Okay, thank you, boss. Okay, so what we are having here is, as Vinay mentioned, is to go forth from where Vinay left off, is to have an understanding of the corporate GHG quantification processes, including offsets development project. Just to confirm, what Vinay spoke was of GHG, various GHG programs, which would typically apply to the offsets development program. While the corporate GHG quantification program may apply the schemes, it doesn't need to really do that. It can have a separate way of demonstrating their own quantification. So let me go first into the part one of the, as I said, okay, now the presentation is split into two parts. Part one is on the quantification. So we will explain the quantification, and part two is on the offsets project development. So that's how the presentation has been distributed. And as you see, the basis for the corporate GHG accounting is 14,000 part one, which is a specification with guidance at the organizational level. So the organizational level is the keyword here, keywords rather, for quantification and reporting of the greenhouse gas emissions and removal. The latter part remains identical for both these standards, but to what these particular standards are addressing is key. So here it is at the organizational level. So organization could be, example, in case of India, Tata Motors, example, or Tata House as a whole, with Tata Motors as one of the branches. It could have Tata Steels and so on and so forth. And what does ISO 14064 Part 1 do really? It details out the design principles and requirements for the entire cycle of the GHG management processes, including how to demonstrate and get your inventories, which is related to greenhouse gases, sort of addressed. And what does that address include? It include the boundaries. So example, picking on the same example of Tata Motors or Tata Steels, the physical boundary or the contracted boundary of the organization. What are the quantifying emissions that we'll be looking at? I will explain that later on. So the GHG emissions, what are we looking at? The specific actions that we need to aim at for improving the GHG management. So Tata Motors may have, say, a scheme saying, now, I will reduce, example, I'm saying, my total consumption of resources in the company from what I used to do previously. This is a good specified action for a company. And it also includes requirements and guidance on inventory quality management, reporting, auditing, and organizational responsibility. So if anybody out here among the participants is familiar with ISO 14,000, ISO 9,000, they would very well be able to completely sort of orient themselves with the latter part of this particular standard. Going into how the first part of the presentation is structured, we will first get into the definitions. Then we will also have a look at what are the principles set by the standards, what are the steps to go about doing the inventorization, and what are the typical GHG or greenhouse gas emissions we are looking at. Then we have distributed the presentation into all the relevant steps, which is step one being planning processes. The step two being after your plan, okay, this is what I will do. This is where my boundaries lie. This is what I will quantify and setting the scope of the work. What will I do then? How will I collect the data? What are the indicators or KPIs or whatever else that you are familiar with terms? And then the quantification of these collected data. How to ensure the quality of the inventory, because after you've done all the collection, compilation, quantification, you need to ensure that the collected information is of high quality. And then report that high quality compiled data into a reporting structure. So let's get into first the key terms and definitions. Now, this is the definitions that have been picked up are directly, these are not invented by anybody else, but they're coming directly from ISO 14064 Part 1 under what is called the inventory process. So what does the inventory mean? Inventory is just nothing but a word of what you would characterize as what you want to quantify. So it's an inventory, what all you will collect to quantify and report. So a greenhouse gas inventory is a list of emission sources. So this is addressing the what. What is a greenhouse gas inventory? It is the list of emission sources. Where will you get the sources from? From the associated emissions, which are associated to what? Associated to the quantifiable means or the processes that we have spoken about. And using what? How will you do that? By using quantified standardized methods. We will look at the standardized methods very briefly, but not deep dive right now. And then you are, as I said, the inventory has to be reported. Now, what does a report mean? A report is a standalone document which is intended to communicate, because any report is a means of communication to external parties or to internal parties or whoever you describe yourselves as people of relevance. And these are called in the language of ISO 14000 Part 1 as intended users. So these intended users are the ones to whom we want to ensure that our report, which we are demonstrating, is going to be communicated to. And who could this intended users be? This is the one here. This could be individuals, organizations who rely on this information to make their own decisions. So now some of them could be your internal stakeholders, the management itself. So Tata Steel's reporting to its HQ. The HQ, Tata HQ becomes the intended user because it's going to use the information from Tata Steels to make further decisions. It could be a regulatory body. So I heard some of the speakers saying earlier on about SEBI. So SEBI could be one of the intended users. And what the report does, it makes an assertion statement, which is a factual and objective declaration on which will be taken over by Kaviraj of how that factual declaration needs to be validated and verified. So it could be second party validation or verification or a third party validation and verification. Some of the terms that will keep on recurring, and these are important terms, so I'm making sure that they are heard by you if they were not heard by you before, is base year. Now, base year is something which I said. So if I'm going to report on something, I'm going to quantify something, I'm going to make a list and inventory, I need to have a benchmark. And that benchmark is more likely than not a historic benchmark, because I need to know where I'm coming from to know where I'm going, right? So this is called the historic period identified for the purpose of comparing the GHG emissions, which is related to time. So I could say, I want to have a base year of, we are in 2023 or 2020. And I want to know from 2020, whatever happened in the inventory then, how I will progress from there on to 2024 and there on to 2025 and so on and so forth. What is the monitoring? The monitoring is evolving the entire process so that you keep on coming back to quantification of what you are going to do. So it's a periodic assessment of the GHG emissions and other GHG related data. Stepping into principles, the steps and greenhouse gases. So here I think I will first look at the principles. Now the principles on the left hand side are coming from what is a voluntary program called Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is demonstrated by World Business Council for Sustainable Development and World Resources Institute, which is typically used by many organizations. So I have selected that. As all of you know, that the most of the standards are not ISO standards, are not GHG program specific, or they are rather GHG program neutral. So you can use the basis of ISO to select a program that you think is closest to your culture, your processes to adopt and build upon the ISO. And the GHG principles are no different from, or rather similar to the financial accounting and reporting principles. So the GHG accounting principles underpin and guide the GHG accounting and reporting processes, and underpins the purposes to ensure that the reporting information is faithful and true to its intended purpose and accompanies demonstration of the GHG emissions. So anybody who makes the claims, I have done this GHG emissions, can stand by them and say confidently, I've done all the things that the principles apply to. Some of the principles are they should be relevant to your organization, they should be complete, they should be consistent with what you're doing and between themselves, accurate and transparent. All of these are extremely key, and you will see them demonstrated not only in the corporate GHG inventory, but across the board. So when we jump over to the CDM world, which Vinay described, or the GCC world, or the GS world, all of them, the entire underpinning is based on these fundamentals. If you don't have these fundamentals, you'll be questioned by the likes of the third party bodies, which is going to be Kaviraj. And the steps are the same as I would say a plan, do, check, act, which everybody knows, is to first have the scope and the planning of the inventory, then the collection of data, develop the inventory, and then report on it. After reporting, you can also track and progress the manner in which your company is doing or your corporate is doing. We have been speaking about greenhouse gases. What are they? So the greenhouse gases are basically what are the Kyoto Protocol gases, which is the previous. I would say a Kyoto Protocol is a precursor to what formulated the current regimen of the different Paris agreements and the different regulatory voluntary regulations that are coming up to ensure that we are meeting our goals and targets to our objectives to maintain the global temperature to 1.5 degrees. And most of these gases, which are the 7 gases of Kyoto Protocol or UNFCCC right now, I shouldn't say Kyoto Protocol, or UNFCCC Kyoto Protocol, are also covered by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is one of the apex body which sort of informs the decision makers, which is the UNFCCC in this case, of how to recognize the current take scientific information, sound scientific information able to make the decisions that are impregnated into the Paris Agreement. And most of these gases are compulsorily, if I've not seen any different, at least the UNFCCC Kyoto Protocol gases are compulsorily managed by any sound corporate reporting. So you may say, these are not applicable to me. Some of them will not be, but whatever are applicable will necessarily be brought on board. So let's get into the steps. So we have, as I said, the base here. Now, corporations or firms or companies, whatever you choose to call them, I'm using the word corporations very loosely here, will choose a base year against which to compare current and monitored future emissions. And why? Because they need to be tracked. And most corporations usually select a single base year as a base year for emissions, like I said. And I started my corporate inventory study planning today in 2023. I selected 2020 as the most representative year of my current structure. So there may be other ways of doing it. You may choose an average over annual years. So you say, okay, my production plans were fluctuating from 2018 to 2019 to 2020 and stabilize from 2020. So I'll select those years to represent the current structure. Setting the organizational boundaries. So the boundary is categorized into direct and indirect GHG emissions. I will come to that. So there are direct emissions and indirect emissions. Just remember that, and we will come to what it means subsequently. And we have to identify all the facilities on which these direct, indirect emissions will need to be based, from which we will collect the information to set up the inventory. And these need to be identified a priori, means beforehand, or ex ante. The standardized means of demonstrating or quantifying can be various means of doing it, as I said, but typically, as I said, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a good place to go to if you think it can qualify to your nature of operations, and it provides an hierarchical approach. It's a tiered approach, so you can choose. Okay, I want to use the simplest level, which is called tier 1, or I want to go to monitoring the details, so tier 2, and tier 3 is the toughest. So you can choose the tiers as to which particular parameter or which particular set of data you want to go to a greater detail of collecting information, and which set of data you may choose to use defaults. And say, okay, I will take industrial defaults, I'll take industrial benchmarks, I will not do my own calculations, example. So the chosen approach for choosing the standardized methods is dependent, as I said, on the culture, on the relevance and the representative of the sector. For example, I've seen in the cement industry, there are strong industrial benchmarks for the Indian sector. So they don't need to do additional work. They can easily choose the sectoral benchmarks that have been set out at the national or regional level, and pick and choose them and say they are representative of my organization, no matter whether I sit in Maharashtra, in a place called Pune, or am I sitting in Kolhapur or Nagpur. They're all same because regionally I'm covered. So that's one example. Some of the links on the standardized baselines have been set over there, which is the GHG protocol. You have the UNFCCC, that is the United Framework Convention on Climate Change Methodologies, which Vinay spoke about. You have the IPCC, you have others. There's a whole list which we can't get into right now. So let's get into what I was saying, the data collection and quantification. The pictorial on the right is, if you can see, there are direct and indirect emissions, and the types of emissions are scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And what are they? Let's look at the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is nomenclatured as direct emissions. Scope 2 and scope 3 are nomenclatured as indirect emissions, indirect GHG emissions, of course. And each of these, you need to identify which are relevant to your own operations, right? Of the organizational boundary you have set. So type 1 emissions or scope 1 emissions are direct emissions that the corporate owns and under your own control. So if you say you are a steel sector and you're producing iron, and I say, no, I don't want to do the emissions coming from iron, that's sort of then questionable, because you own that direct, whatever steel you're producing, whatever iron you're producing, whatever else consumption you're having in your own facility is your own. You cannot say this cannot be controlled because they are under your direct ownership. So these are unquestionably to be reported. Then you have indirect emissions. This could be controlled by other organizations. So let's imagine you have steam coming from a neighboring industry, which you utilize, and you are contracting them, saying, I want this quantity of steam and this quality of steam. And I have a contract for purchase of that steam. So you are not in direct control of that steam that is being brought over to your project boundary for your own consumption. So that are direct. But because you're contracted, these most likely will also be necessitated to be considered in your GHG inventory. And last is scope 3. So scope 3 is business travel, employees travel. So you have employees going to their homes after the work day is over, or bringing them to work, and you contract somebody called Sing Travels, sitting in out somewhere in Delhi, and all the people in Delhi are collected and then assimilated and brought over to your factory premises. These are indirect emissions, and most likely these are, if you do not consider them, it is most likely allowable, but there is a whole different regimen on this, talk that is happening on scope 3 emissions. So just to simplify, scope 1 direct emissions, which are in your own control, have to be quantified. Scope 2 indirect emissions, which you're contractually obligated to monitor and measure, because without them, your own operations, when controlled operations cannot function, most likely will be quantified. So the data collection and quantification. So at its simplest, you have to, this is a structure, a very good flow diagram, I think, pictorial, which says identify sources, select the calculation method, collect the data, apply the calculation tools, and then assimilate it at the corporate level. So at its simplest, the quantification approach is a process of obtaining data and determining emissions from sources, which we talked about: scope 1, scope 2 categorization, scope 3, and removal by things. You can forget the latter. And the GHG inventory, the approach is usually identification of the activity data, my steel mill, the amount of steel, the kiln, the amount of heat supplied to the kiln, etc., and the emission factors associated with the greenhouse gas emissions. So whether it be CO2, CH4, etc., then how do you choose the activity data emission factor? As I was mentioning previously, you can have industry-specific good practice guidance or benchmarking that are available on the activity data. Amount of steel producing in Maharashtra, if you deliver so much tonnage, this is most likely your activity data and emission factors related to that production of steel. So this is the way of choosing your activity data and emission factors. The calculation methods could be those subscribed by either by IPCC, GHG protocol, or you have borrowed it from your own industry practices. So there is a host of calculation methods that you can imbibe from your external environment, or you may have your own means of demonstrating, which will be evaluated and, of course, analyzed to ensure that they are meeting the principles that we spoke upon earlier. Then quality control, internal reporting, and documentation. This is normal part of the QA/QC and reporting, and this is part of the good practice guidance for ensuring that your quality of data is supported by strong actions which can be trusted. The management plan is the same thing if you're I mean, just to borrow ISO 9000 processes, you're just developing a quality management plan. You're ensuring that you have a team involved. You have the processes for documenting and collecting the inventory of whatever you want to monitor and measure, and that it can be supported year on year, not just that I did it in the first 6 months and suddenly the program disappears and then it has failed to meet its objective. So you need to have continuity, and it addresses the unique procedures that you're creating. So you don't have to create more than what you have. You may borrow them and then supplement them or enhance them to have the GHG inventory emissions data topped up on the procedures that you already have. So this is something which is similar to the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle that we all are aware of. Now the reporting is based. I borrowed this from ISO 14064-1 and used them loosely. So these are the chapters that ideally you should have in any good reporting structure. So you will have the description of the goals and inventory, what I want to do as an organization. You will tell the audience, whoever it is, whether it is internal or external, what I want to achieve from that. The purposes, the reporting period, will I do it only for 5 years, or after 5 years, what will I do? What is the frequency of reporting? Is it going to be annual? Is it going to be 6 monthly? Is it going to be biannually? Or it'll be every 2 years? Then among the greenhouse gases emissions considered, etc. Then you have organizational boundaries, all the identified facilities, the relevant emission operations which will be identifying the emission sources, the boundaries which will also at least have reporting consideration of scope 1. As I said, you cannot say I will avoid reporting on my scope 1 emissions. These are necessarily in your control, so you need to report them. Then the actual collection of data and their quantification, and then the assessment of the information to produce the performance benchmarks for your own organization, and then say, looking back at the base year, whether am I doing better, or can I need to borrow other indicators from my other industry types, from my competition, to see where I'm going. This is a snapshot of the template that is already there in the ISO 14064 Part 1. I know it's small, but if you have the ISO standard, you can easily go to this template and see it for yourself. All I have done is to identify the important if you can see, there are star marks here, which say that direct year, for example, direct emissions will be reported, and so on and so forth. You'll have most likely the financial indicators of what you're going to have in terms of, say, you have external agencies for delivering renewable energy. You have a contract with somebody sitting in your neighborhood. I don't know if it's allowed in India, because I know there's wheeling, as I know from previous experiences, that you cannot borrow directly from the grid and say this is a cleaner and this is not clean. But maybe you already have in your premises a windmill. So then you can easily say this is my captive emissions and captive generation, which is clean, and I can deduct it from the total grid emissions, which is more dirty. So then you can use those two as a comparative and say, okay, I'm cleaning my operations more and more. Example. So that's it. We are going to leave part 1, and I'm going to rush to part 2, which is now the offsets project development. And this is ISO 14064 part 2. And this is specification and guidance at the project level. Project level, I'm saying, because the other one was at the organizational level. This is at the project level. So when you talk about projects, and this is where all the schemes that Vinay spoke about in the earlier presentation come to fruition, because most projects will want to generate their offsets as per the schemes under which they will be evolved. So you will have, example, gold standard offsets cannot be sort of once you have generated the offsets in gold standard, you have to use the gold standard scheme. And for Vera offsets, you have to choose the Vera scheme. So you need to be scheme specific for what quantification monitoring will be adhered to at the project level by the means of the scheme already selected. It's preset then. So ISO focuses, for part 2, focuses on project-based activities, and this is important. It talks about principles for determining project baseline scenarios, or project baselines, or baseline scenarios. We'll come to that. But remember that baseline scenarios, monitoring, quantification, MRV, demonstration of materiality, etc., comes a lot into play when we start talking about projects. So slightly different. We are in the same context of emissions, inventorization, management, and control, but the references are going to be slightly different because how they are manifested and for whom they are manifested is the differential. Again, the structure, we are going to look at what are project categories. Vinay spoke about sectors and sectoral scopes. We're going to look at categories. Then we're going to look at what are the methodologies which the schemes that Vinay spoke about possibly address. How these methodologies characterize also not only by sector, but also possibly also by technology type. And that what is a typical activity cycle for an offset project? What are the typical questions that we as consultants need to ask to see if the project realization can happen under any of the schemes? And some of the things that are key to offset development is baseline scenario, additionality, emission reductions. And the reporting template will be, again, it's a snapshot of a reporting template that I borrowed from one of the schemes. Digging in directly. So categories. Mostly we have, I'm sure you've heard of this, reduction strategies, mitigation strategies, removal mechanisms. What are they? So what are the possible offset projects that can fit under each of these reductions? So renewable energy, solar, wind, otherwise hydro, all fall under renewable energy. Improved energy efficiency is reduction measure. So it falls under reduction, mitigation and reduction category. Fuel or feedstock switch. I switch from, say, coal to wind. So, or from coal to a lesser or more cleaner fuel, say gas. Then that's a fuel switch. Feedstock, I change my base material to something more equitable to sustainability. That's a feedstock switch. We are not going to go into afforestation. That's a completely different world. Methane capture, landfill gas, most likely. From you capture landfill gas, biogas from capture and generation of electricity. That's removal. Of course, electricity generation is not removal, that's reduction. So let's look at each of these components separately in what is renewable energy. So your hydro, wind, solar cooker, biomass fired boilers as renewable energy categories and subcategories. Energy efficiency, use of high efficiency refrigerators, high efficient light bulbs, that's energy efficiency. Improving energy efficiency in your energy operations like efficient steam engines, waste heat recovery, GHG avoidances, avoidance of anaerobic decay of biomass. You dump biomass in the fields, but now instead of dumping them in the fields, you ensure that it is extracted from the environment and brought into control, because anaerobic decomposition means methane generations. If you avoid methane generation, you get the credits for it. Reduction of fertilizer use. In GHG destruction, you have combustion of biogas, which was mentioned previously, and N2O destruction. So again, baseline and monitoring methodology. So each of these categories can further have their own individual methodologies, which you can apply directly. And some of these are numbered with a description. So VCS, this is only just snapshots again. This is not the full, the environment under which we operate for the various schemes. So you'll have to go through the various schemes to understand what these methodologies are. But just to give you a few indications of how they are functioning, we have in the VERA, listed project methodologies which you can apply if it applies to your project. You have under clean development mechanisms which have over 200 approved methodologies and methodological tools which you can say utilize. So let me look at one example. So here we have AM36. If you see here where my mouse cursor is, and it says use of biomass is in heat generation equipment. So you most typically will say, okay, AM36. I can apply AM36 if I have something that is similar to heat generation from the use of biomass. And then you have technology. So you also have demonstration of the categorization by technology type. So if I'm using, for example, if I stick to the same example of use of biomass by heat generation equipment, I have a superior boiler. Then probably I know that the technology that I'm using for heat generation is boilers. So I'll go to boilers and I say, okay, I have these many methodologies that I can choose from. Or I go to steam systems and I say, there are two methodologies that I can use from. So, so I have taken up one example, probably on chillers, because it has only one methodology that can apply to AM60. But if you look at chillers, you see there are 5 methodologies applicable because they are under different conditions that they can be applied. And if you see the nomenclature, these are dependent on large scale and small scale. So if your project is large scale, this is the brown bandwidth here. And if it's a small scale, it's the slightly yellow bandwidth. And you can see that there are 5. If you are a small scale, you can apply a different type of methodology. I don't want to go too much into it. I know it can get quickly confusing, but just to give you a picture that you can either identify the methodology that applies to your own project by means of the descriptors that you have or the technology type that you have. Descriptors being the sectoral scopes. So typical activity cycle, it follows a traditional project development path and timeline. Timeline is important here. So you have the planning of the activity and the prior consideration, which Vinay spoke about. You need to have a project which is prior considered, not that you have a project that is fully developed and suddenly you want to now bring it under a scheme. Most likely any scheme bar a few will not allow that. So you need to have a pre-feasibility assessment. Does the project fit with the scheme or the standard, which is the prior assessment? Is the project eligible? So you have to make the feasibility assessment, and then you have to establish the methodological standard, data gathering, and preparation of the documentation. You submit a full design document, and that's where Kaviraj takes over. He will do the certification and the approval to say if the project does qualify under the scheme under which it is selected. After the registration, you also have a project implementation cycle. We'll not be discussing this particular cycle because it's too large to get into that right now in the short scale that we have, time scale that we have. And it is the monitoring and reporting phase, which is usually called as MRV, monitoring, reporting, verifications, which is the tracking of the management plan that you have already introduced in your project design to confirm that it is following that project design management plan, tracking it, and ensuring the reporting. So typical questions, as I said, is the identified GHG project activity eligible under scheme? You will look at the potential GHG project activity. You will look at the sectoral scope. Is it sectoral scope 1? Is it sectoral scope 5? 5 is being chemical, sectoral scope 10, oil and gas, whatever it may be. Sectoral scope 4, cement industry. Technology and measure, as I said, are we looking at clinker? Are we looking at cement? Are we looking at energy generation by biomass? Are we looking at energy generation by solar, etc., etc.? Then we have to check the scheme specific eligibility criteria for participation, identify the methodology, which previous slides have already told you how to do that, and then produce the scheme-specific documentation. Now, scheme-specific documentation, because each scheme has its own ways of reporting. You can't subscribe to Vera standard by applying a gold standard project documentation. It just will not fly. And what do you need to do when you compare your project against the standard, which is this identified methodology? You need to figure out if the conditions of that methodology apply to your project. If it doesn't apply, your project doesn't qualify under that methodology. Then you have to consider whether the baseline and the baseline scenario would matches with that methodology, which is ex ante, meaning beforehand consideration. Then you have to also look at whether I'll be able to execute the monitoring based on the methodology that is being proposed to be used for my project activity. And finally, last but not the least, the documentation. This is, I'm going to go through it very quickly again, but it's a good demonstration that you will tell you about the difference between baseline, additionality, and the emission reductions. So let's imagine we are having a project, and these are the GHG emissions, and this is the time or the years under which we are starting the project. This is typically the project GHG emissions over time. It will keep on increasing. And the dotted line is a hypothetical linear description of how the progression of those emissions would take place under the same operating conditions. And these are called the baseline emissions. And this is related to both the baseline emissions here and the baseline scenario. And the baseline scenario is this scenario, which is representing what would be happening in the absence of the project, which is this project, which is the green line, which we'll shortly introduce. And this is the introduction of this project. So this is the hypothetical scenario. This is now becomes a real scenario. So this is the baseline and the baseline scenario, our hypothetical scenario, or BAU, business as usual scenario, which is happening or going to happen in the absence of this project. So we have realized the project, which is a green line, and this is the amount of reductions that are taking place by the implementation of the project, which is this cursor here and this curve here. And that will be the difference between your hypothetical emissions and your real emissions is your emission reductions or your carbon credits, which are realized under the scheme. And there is a concept which is a really debated and crunched concept called additionality, which is a GHG project. Even when you have a project which is here, which is giving real emissions, it needs to be not only real, but it also needs to be additional, that means the reductions are below that would have occurred in the absence of the registered project activity. I put registered CDM project activity, forgive me, just say registered activity, which is this hypothetical scenario. We can revisit this later on, but let me go to the next slide quickly. And sorry about that. Again, sticking to methodologies, again, what does the methodologies do? It provides a mandatory assessment level of attainment of performance or specifications related to the setting of the baseline, which is this baseline and its calculations. Means to demonstrate additionality, which is this block, which is even when you have a real demonstration of reductions, you still need to prove that the project is additional. Means to ensure accurate monitoring, and means to calculate these emission reductions. You can't choose your way of demonstrating emission reductions. They are prescribed ways of doing it. Then the baseline is, again, approaches. There are various ways of setting the baseline, which is based on the existing actual or historical or counterfactual. What is shown here is a counterfactual or historical or business as usual, hypothetical. And the additionality can only be demonstrated when projects have producing lower emissions than the baseline. And I don't want to go into this. Vinay has already covered this, but that the project developer is to choose the applicable baseline BAU, which is based on the associated baseline emissions or GHGs that would happen in the baseline scenario. I've given two examples here of baseline approaches. One is a historical and one is actual. So historical data should be in the historical instance. If you choose a historical baseline or baseline scenario, then it is based on historical data. So where historical data should be used to calculate the baseline emissions, where it is likely that in the absence of the project activity, replace CDM with project activity, the current business practice will continue without change in conditions, which is the BAU. So the example is an average performance of boiler. Here you can take the years of historical performance, say 2 years or 3 years before, because the conditions of the boiler would not change. We are assuming that the boiler would remain the same. Its level of performance, efficiency will not change over time. Or if you have an efficiency curve, we'll still be able to discuss what will be the efficiency over time. But by and large, you will be able to fall back on your historical information to envisage what is happening in the future. So in that case, you will use a baseline which is based on historical emissions. But let's imagine you have a condition where your year-on-year information keeps on changes. Then you cannot fall back on your historical information. Then you will need to have a baseline scenario which is based on actual information, which is as it is happening right now. And one of the greatest example here is the landfill gas destruction, because the amount of landfill gas that is being extracted year on year changes from last year to this year because maybe the conditions change, the temperatures change, the environmental situation has changed, the quality and the quantity of waste that is coming in is changed. So here you will use the actual emissions. So here the baseline emissions are calculated using actual measurement of the gas emitted in the year. So by and large, this is critical in the demonstration of an actual project in line with the scheme you have selected, the methodology, the sector, the technology which you will apply, and the method and the demonstration of the monitoring and the evaluation that you will conduct. Yes, it's a bit too much, but then this is the cycle that we'll have to go through if we have to demonstrate an offset project. A typical template looks like this. It is borrowed again from CDM, Clean Development Mechanism. And this is only a template for project development. It is not for project monitoring. For monitoring, as I said, we are not discussing monitoring, but for monitoring, it will have a different template. And if you see the source gases, which is the direct, indirect of the corporate accounting world, is always talks about source emissions from CO2, CH4, N2O, etc. So you can add the other gases which are relevant to your establishment. You will choose the methodology, you will describe the methodology, you will describe the location of the methodology, sectoral scope which it represents, etc. And then you will ensure that your emission reduction calculations are performed as per the methodological description that you have for the methodology you have chosen. And then you will also have, for example, the monitoring plan, which is fixed at the time of registration, which you cannot change later on. There are ways to do it, but ideally it cannot be changed. It is held over time for which the crediting the crediting period is, for where you want the offset generations to monetize. So usually the typical crediting periods are 10 years of crediting for an offset project, or it could be multiples of 7 or 5, depending on which scheme you're selecting. So by that, I come to the end of my presentation, and I hand it back over to the CCC Secretariat, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moyuresh. It was a wonderful presentation explaining about the ISO 14064 Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 about the quantifying emissions and the corporate GHG accounting steps involved with the PDCA cycle. And Part 2 on the offset project development. It was very detailed presentation. Thanks a lot. And we are now at 4:35. So we have 25 minutes more. And we have Mr. Kaviraj waiting for us. Let me introduce him. Yeah, Mr. Kaviraj is the Managing Director of Earthhood, the founder and Managing Director of Earthhood, a globally recognized leader in carbon offset verification. Earthhood is accredited by UNFCCC, Vera, GS and GCC, those bodies which Vinay pointed out in the beginning, and many more other leading carbon standards and registries. And Dr. Singh has an exceptional record of conducting over 200 carbon offset audits across diverse projects, visiting more than 100 countries. That's quite a big number. He actively participates in multiple national and international committees dedicated to climate change, currently serving as the president of the International Carbon Auditor Forum, Indian Carbon Alliance, member of expert committee of ICVCMI and Vera. And before starting his professional journey, Dr. Singh completed master's degree in energy management and a doctorate in environmental engineering from IIT Delhi. Dr. Singh's academic excellence is reflected in his authored and co-authored books, along with an extensive publication record in reputable international journals and 2 national scholarship and 1 prestigious international scholarship during his formative years. Handing over to Mr. Kaviraj.
Thank you, sir. Let me just quickly share. Perfect. So thank you very much, sir, for the introduction. And being the last presenter, there are advantages and disadvantages. So I'm the last one today. The advantage is that most of the things I wanted to talk about has already been covered by Mayuresh sir and Vinay sir. And the disadvantage is that whether, I mean, there is a situation that either you are left with more time than allocated or you are left with less time than allocated. So I think I'm left with the lesser time than allocated. So my life is relatively easier. So thank you very much. So I'll be talking about mainly the third-party aspects of the inventory and projects. And there are 2 things which we discussed. When we say inventory, means you are just calculating how much emission you have as an entity, organization, industry, process, or maybe product. And then when we say projects, means mainly carbon offset projects. So my job is not less than checking your answer sheets because the questions are already set by programs and registry. You know what to do it, you know how to do it. And I am the one who you hate most to have in your premises because I'm the auditor. So let's begin with, and this is a very beautiful story. Normally, I cannot resist myself not to share this story whenever I have the presentations. And most of you would know the story of great poet Kalidas. But, just to set the context right. But before I share the story, the disclaimer, the person sitting on the right side of the screen is not me, but the representation of pretty much all the human beings, rather most of the human beings we have on the planet. So the story goes back to the history. There was a beautiful princess, Shakuntala, and she decided to marry the most intelligent person on the earth. And then, obviously her expectations were a little higher. So she was pretty much rejecting all the princes and kings who were approaching her to get married. So all these princes and kings who were rejected by her decided to form a union and then give her good lessons. So they said, okay, she wanted to marry the most intelligent person. We would figure out the most stupid person on the planet and then somehow convince this guy to marry her. So they started roaming around in the jungle, and they identified there was a guy sitting on a branch of the tree and trying to cut the same. So they said, okay, he's the most stupid person because he doesn't know what he's working on. So they took this guy back to the palace and somehow convinced the princess to get married, got married, finally divorced, and then he became one of the most, reputed king, brother the poet in our society, which is Kalidas. So the story is same. Now you know the context. Aren't we doing the same thing, pretty much trying to cut the same branch we are sitting on? And when I say branch, means this planet, Mother Earth. So we are not less than the stupid one, which was Kalidas back then. So you know the problem, but just to give you a perspective, now we are getting into the regulatory framework of Paris Agreement, and there are certain expectations from Paris Agreement, but we are not doing good enough, to be honest. Most likely, and this is not me what says so, this is the research by the climatetracker.org, which is like the NGO doing a very good research. So 66% are the chances that 1.5 degree will be breached by 2027. And if we are breaching that, then there are catastrophic situations which are just waiting for us to happen. And so I'm not discussing all those things today, rather come to the point. So we know there is a problem, which is climate change. We know there is, this phenomena which we see day in, day out. What are the solutions? So solution is carbon neutral. And when we say carbon neutral, there are the following choices. First one, I switch to renewable energy. Whatever energy consumption and uses I have, I try and make it renewable as much as possible. But this choice is not always available. Then the second thing is I do energy efficiency. Like, Mayuresh has talked about different sectors, cement, steel, iron. These people are trying to cut down their GHG emissions by doing energy efficiency. So that's a second choice. But if I'm not able to achieve net zero by switching to renewable or by applying to energy efficiencies, what choices I have? And here comes the third choice, which is carbon offset. So carbon offset is nothing but a simple phenomena where somebody else is doing emission reduction and you are buying those emission reduction in terms of the certificate and using those emission reduction to achieve your net zero goals. So there are different processes and standards which are applicable here. And here comes the standard, which is ISO 14064. So part one is just setting the rules that how do you calculate your inventory. And part two is setting the rules that, okay, if you are doing a carbon offset project, how would you do that? But before we go there, let's understand the policy level rules, because ISO 14064 is just the standard, but there are other standards as well, which are prescribing carbon offset. So it all started with Paris Agreement, where the rule book for CDM came out. First project happened, I think, in 2005. And then there are, almost 8,000 projects which are registered with CDM. So CDM, in my understanding, is the mother of all carbon offset projects, whether it's voluntary or regulatory. And now, because the Kyoto Protocol expired in 2020, so there are no possible projects happening under Kyoto framework, we are getting into Paris Agreement. And when I say Paris Agreement, means Article 6.2 and 6.4. So Article 6.4 is nothing but a different name of the existing projects with certain additional requirements which we need to follow when we are getting our carbon offset project register under Paris Agreement. So in next COP, which is happening in Dubai this year, most likely we would have the rule book coming out precisely prescribing that how the projects under Article 6.4, and that's a regulatory market. Vinay talked about there are two categories of the market. One is voluntary and the second one is regulatory or compliance. But broadly speaking, the rule books are same, whether you are doing a project in voluntary market or in the regulatory market. As of now, we have very similar rules as long as the baseline additionality and monitoring aspects are concerned. So now this is just to give you a sense that when we say carbon offset, there is VERA, there is GCC, Gold Standard, United Nations Article 6.4, earlier it was CDM, Climate Action Reserves, global standards, and ISO. Obviously, you can do a project using ISO 14064 as well. So different standards are setting different rules, but ISO is pretty much open. It's standard neutral, so you can have ISO certification and then apply VERA and gold standard as well. So when we do projects under VERA says, okay, first, as a third party, you must have the ISO accreditation by the national entities. Also, we can have the accreditation from NAB, you can have accreditation from Indian regulators, you can have accreditation from UK regulators, and then only you can do projects with VERA. So this is how the system comes into the picture. Now, here comes the complexity. When we say carbon offset, I think for three of us, Mayuresh sir and Vinay sir and me, we need almost 3 days, one each, and then only we'll be justifying the whole things of carbon offset, that how does it work, what are the complexities, what are different stages, what are different documents, and it's getting complex and complex, as the time is moving. But just to give you a very simplified perspective, all of you would know how do we play cricket. So on the right side, it's just the way cricket is being played, and on the left side you have certain terminologies and few things which I will be explaining in a bit, that how the carbon offset work. And here comes my job, that if I'm doing a verification or validation, these are two separate terms. So let me quickly clarify. So when you have a carbon offset project, there are two separate stages. One is project registration. We also call it validation. Means you have a project which you believe is a potential carbon offset project. You will come to a third party, and then you will say, okay, I want to get this project registered. So when you are making such claims, that's a registration, and we validate those claims. We submit the report to VERA and gold standard. We say your project is registered. The second one is verification. Verification is nothing but the issuances of your actual credits. It's a time-sensitive activity. You can get the verification done on a month-to-month basis, on yearly basis, once in 2 years, once in 5 years. There are flexibilities there. But most likely, more people are getting the verification done on year basis because of cash flows and other aspects. So two separate terms I'll be using. Okay, so let's start with the standard. So whenever you decide to have a carbon offset project, first thing you need to do is pick and choose your standard. Standard can be VERA, gold standard, if it's a regulatory side, Article 6.4, or other domestic schemes like India is coming up, Indonesia is coming up, and other countries are coming up with different domestic schemes. Once you have chosen the standard, then you need to follow those particular templates given by those standards. Obviously, country and location is also important. When I say country and location, there may be different rules for doing carbon offset project depending on the economical status of the country. For example, if you are doing a project in LDC, Vinay sir highlighted that renewable energy projects are no more accepted by VERA and gold standard. But if you have a renewable energy project in the LDC, you can still get the project registered. So therefore, the country is also important. And then comes the sectoral scope. Whether you are doing projects in renewable energy, energy efficiency, afforestation, oil and gas, there are 16 different sectors identified in United Nations, and most of the standards are following them. But there are situations where they are grouping these sectors and bringing it down to 4 and 5, for example, VERA. Then when we say project, there may be different categories of the project. The simplest one is project activity. Just to give you a simple example, you have a wind energy project and you want to get it registered. You have 10 megawatt installation. That's a simple project activity. Then comes the program of activities. For example, you would know there are different cook stove, water purification, solar lighting projects happening in the world. So you group smaller activities together, and then you are not doing the registration every time you are bringing new initiatives into the program. So that is program of activities. It's the same with group activities. So when we say United Nations projects under CDM, that is POA, and then VERA says group project activities. So idea is to simplify a few things and then make it easier for the project developer. The second concept is crediting period. Crediting period means when you registered a project, you have two choices broadly. I mean, there are flexibility depending on the standard, but broadly two choices. You fix the crediting period. And when we say fix means you say that 10-year is my fix. So you will get the emission reduction or carbon offsets only for 10 years. And then that's done. Second possibility, you can have a renewable crediting period, means you can renew it 3 times. Initially, you fix it for 7 years. After 7 years, you will go to the standard again, justifying that your baseline additionality is still the same as it was when you registered the project. And then you can have another 7 year, another 7 year. The next thing is local stakeholder consultation. So this is getting important for most of the standards, that they want you to consult the communities, the policymakers, local stakeholders in a way that they are aware there is a carbon offset project happening, and this project is not creating any negative environmental impacts whatsoever to the communities or to the societies around the project. So getting the feedback is also important. So when we do audit, we go and interview the people around the project, that they are aware there is a project happening and there are no concerns raised by the communities and societies and civic bodies with reference to their project activity. Then comes the emission reduction and removal, means the actual project activity which you are doing. So when you are doing all these things, the important aspect is the methodologies, because first you identify your project and then you have to pick and choose one of those methodologies. Until now, most of the methodologies what people are using were issued and prepared by United Nations, but Vera and Gold Standard are also coming up their own methodologies, and the number is increasing. But I would say still the bigger number of the methodologies is with United Nations. So this methodology aspect is a bit complex, because there is a project which you believe is actual carbon offset project. It will lead to emission reduction, but as an auditor, I want to make sure that the project activity is fitting into the existing methodology. And we receive almost 10 and 12 inquiries every week, different people approaching us that I have a project, can you validate it? And then we ask for the methodology. They have no clue what is methodology, and even if they have a clue, the methodology is not fitting into their project activity. In such a scenario, if you have such activity you believe is leading to emission reduction, is a potential carbon offset project, you can also generate or develop rather your own methodology and get it approved by Vera or by United Nations. So this is a possibility available, that you can have your own methodology. And then someone who developed the project, we call it project proponent or CME if it's a group project. There comes the DOE, designated operational entity. This is what a third party is being called under the regulatory market, especially CDM, and validation verification body when we say the activity is voluntary. So this is just very quickly, how does the auditing work? Now, this particular, slide would give you some understanding about the registration and issuances. There is another concept, we call it post-registration changes, because there is a lot of documentation involved. Like I said, it's not simple to understand how does carbon offset work in 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So I'm just trying to touch upon some of the terminologies which you would be listening to when you are talking to different people about carbon offset. So post-registration change is another aspect of the cycle. Let's say you got your project registered and you said in your original documentation that you have a 10 megawatt project, but when you're actually implementing the project, for some reason, you have 10.5 or 9.5 megawatt. So to me, as a third party auditor, when I'm doing the site visit, I will ask for the documentation that prove me it's 10 megawatt. I will count the turbine myself and look at the files. But then if it's 9.5 megawatt, you have to change your entire documentation, and that's a separate process to deal with it. We call it post-registration changes validation. So we need to look at the additionality once again, baseline monitoring pretty much everything, compile everything in the report, submit it to program and standards, they will accept it, and then only you can go for the verification. Renewal of crediting period is something which I explained. Initially, you have 10-year fix that you can get the carbon offset, carbon credits for 10 years, whether you do it year on year or you do once in 2 years, 5 years, you still have this possibility. Once your crediting period, if it was not fixed, it was renewable, you have to go for another validation after 7 years. But if it was fixed for 10 years, then that's it. You cannot have any more claims. So now how the validation and verification works from the third party perspective. So regardless the programs and standard, normally this is what most of the programs are calling the document which we need to prepare. The name of the document is project design document. So you have to compile everything in the prescribed templates and then submit it to the third party entity VBB like us. And we will start doing the desk review. Once the desk review is done, we will go on site, check your claims. We come back, compile the report. If you are not meeting any of the set requirements by the program and standard, then we have to raise the findings, non-conformity. In the carbon world, we call them corrective action request and clarifications and forward action requests. There are 3 categories of the non-conformity which we raise. So that's about the assessment. Once the assessment is done, we compile everything in the validation report. And then we submit the validation report to the registry. Registry will, or the standard will register the project. Once that is done, then there is another document, which is monitoring report. So you will give us the monitoring report where you will summarize your monitoring aspects, that if you were supposed to monitor the total power exported, how much is the power you exported, if you were supposed to monitor the steam generated, electricity generated. So very much everything is compiled in this document, which is monitoring report. And then this is coming to us and we are using that document to verify your claims. Eventually it goes to the program and registry, and then you will get your credits into your account. Now, what I was explaining you was in my definitions and my terminologies, but if you want to have a very quick look on the standard, picture itself. So this is how the standard defined the validation and verification entity should work. So what I was explaining is pretty much the same thing, but this is more systematic. That the first thing is pre-engagement. That when any client is approaching us, we need to do a contract review, identifying what kind of project it is, what is the scope of the work, what is the criteria, materiality threshold. Materiality is one of the key parameters, whether we are giving a reasonable level of assurance, absolute level of assurance, whatever. So we need to take all those considerations in the pre-engagement. Once we are confirmed that, yes, we have the expertise, we are accredited in that scope, there is no conflict of interest, then we start doing the actual validation and then we go on site. When we are doing the validation, again, the steps are defined by ISO 65 and all the programs. So we have to follow those steps. So this is nothing but a more systematic way how a third-party audit is being done for the carbon offset project activity. This particular one is for the verification attestation. The stages and steps, what we need to follow broadly remains the same, which is the desk review, on-site assessment, doing the technical review done, submitting the report to program and standard, and then doing so many things around it. Now, in simple terms, if I need to tell the stages which we need to follow under ISO 14064, these are the stages. First one is contract sign. So we have to sign the contract with the client because we are not supposed to provide any consulting. We don't do that. We only start acting on the assessment after the contract is signed. Then we need PDD and monitoring report from you, depending whether it's a validation and verification. We ask for the evidences because in the carbon world, even if something is obvious to me, I still need to prove it and write in my report because I'm talking to you, but when I'm submitting the report, it's being made public. So there is no one to explain how did we do this particular validation or verification. So the report has to be self-explanatory and backed up by different evidences and documents. So therefore, we ask for evidences. I give you example. If you say I'm going to have a 10 megawatt power plant, so I will ask you, give me the power purchase agreement, which you might have signed with the grid company, or the purchase order that you have bought 10 megawatt, or a commissioning certificate you would have because you have a 10 megawatt power exporting the power to grid. So depending the project activity, we ask for n number of documentation. And this is where people who just started developing the project, like the relatively new consultants, get frustrated that why you're asking that, why you're doing that. I'm asking that because I was being asked by the standards and program to ask for that documentation. Otherwise, they will not accept your project. So first I have to be 100% sure whatever claims you are making are genuine, and then only I will put those claims forward to the program and standard. So once I have the evidence, I will start the test review. So team leader, technical expert are the two key people who will do the test review and then raise the findings depending the non-conformity identified. After we send out the findings, we go and do the site visit. On the site visit, we pretty much check the claims. In some situations, we have to do the sampling, especially the distribution projects. If somebody have distributed 10,000, 100,000 cook stoves in a country, so obviously we cannot count those cook stoves. So we need to do a sampling. So there are set rules for the sampling as well. After the site visit, we issue the draft report. Draft report means the team leader has framed the opinion, but that opinion is not yet approved by the technical review. So technical review is a separate team within the VBB. And the job of the technical review team is to make sure that the team leader and the technical expert and everybody who is actually working on the project doing the job right. And when I say doing the job right, means two main points. One, following Earthwood internal procedures or VBB internal procedures, and also following the program and standard requirements. And once technical review is certain that the job is done correctly, he will approve, and then report goes to the registries for the issuance and registration, depending what we are looking at. Now, not in a very systematic way, but I just wanted to give you the three problematic areas when we say carbon offset. The first one is baseline, second one is additionality, and third one is the monitoring aspect. Additionality, Mayuresh sir covered it very nicely. And in simple term, your project activity emission should be over and above than business as usual scenario. Means what you are doing in terms of emission reduction wasn't possible without the benefit of carbon. This is additionality, as simple as that. And baseline is nothing but how do you calculate your existing emissions, which you would have if there is no project activity. So baseline is more on the calculation side. Additionality is more on the financial side, that why you need carbon benefits. And then so baseline and additionality are actually more relevant to the validation. But when you are doing the verification, it's the monitoring aspect, which are really, really important, because when you are working on your PDD, you will pretty much put everything in that document. And then my job is to make sure, if you say you will monitor the power export, give me the power export. If you say you will monitor the power import, give me the power import. If you say you will get your meter calibrated, give me the calibration certificate. So this is how we do the audits. Now, simple examples of additionality so that you have a concept clear, because when you develop a carbon offset project, this is the most problematic area. So if we have a landfill gas, we have a landfill, and in the baseline, let's say in India somewhere, I don't see anybody is capturing the methane coming out and flaring it, just flaring it. So why somebody would capture the methane and flare it unless there are no carbon benefit or there is no regulation by the host country? In Europe, there are certain regulations, even if there's a regulation in India, but that's not implemented. So if I'm the project developer, I go to that landfill site, I collect the methane and I flare it. I will only flare it if there are carbon credits available. So this, to me, this is the simplest and best case example of the additionality, that this project will not happen, this emission reduction will not happen. In the baseline, methane will continue to go to atmosphere if somebody is not giving the carbon offset. Another example is free cook stove distribution. So in India, we use 3-stone, brickstone cook stove. But if somebody is distributing cook stove free of cost with, let's say, efficiency of 35%, so why would somebody distribute the cook stove free of cost if it's the profit-making company? Just because of carbon offset. So those projects are additional. Now, average additionality means there is a landfill, somebody is collecting the methane, but also generating the power. So revenue is coming to the project developer. So if I have the revenue coming to me from the project activity, why would I need carbon credits? So then we need to check reject the claims that revenue is not sufficient, it's not up to the benchmark, and so many other requirements. Third example, and most of the people would be suspicious, they were suspicious back then, they are suspicious now, on the additionality, especially for renewable energy projects. So if you have 1,000 megawatt project anywhere in a developing country and you say this project is additional, so I would question that. Definitely I would be really concerned on the arguments made in that project activity. Another example, if in a country you have 100 megawatt, or let's say I give you India's context. If you have 50 gigawatt solar up and running, and somebody comes and simply says, oh, I have a solar 1 megawatt, which is additional, and 99% projects which are happening are not carbon offset. So you will question how come your project is additional. Then you deep dive and then understand the concept of additionality. So I think we are approaching towards the time closer. This is just an example that there are different standards, where our gold standard, different requirements, but broadly on the concept of additionality, baseline, and monitoring, it remains the same. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for being the good listener, and I look forward for the questions as you have. So thank you very much, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Kaviraj Singh. I think given the shortest time, you had to rush and you have covered your topics. So thank you for enlightening us with the third-party assessment mechanism on how this 14065 is applied. Thank you so much for the explanation. We have a poll, so kindly request all the participants to take the poll. And also we can, there are some questions, I think. There was one question to Mr. Mayuresh. I think it was talking about some, one of the participant asked the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. These words are not used in the ISO standard 14064 part 1. Is that right, Mr. Mayuresh?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 are scheme specific. So like some of these schemes would apply them and use them to, but they are sort of fungible. They can be slip and slide. You can use them across. So scope 1 represents direct emissions, and direct emissions is used by ISO, and indirect emissions is used by ISO. If I remember correctly, and I'm not sure, I'll have to look at the new annexes, because ISO 14064-1 has revised, but they have started using scope 3 to describe indirect emissions. But I'll have to check and come back on that. But yeah, by and large, simply addressing, yes, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 are not used by ISO.
Fine, sir. Thank you, sir. Anyone, any of the other participants, do you have any questions? You are free to ask now. You can raise your hand or you can unmute and speak. Any questions? I think we don't have any other questions, it seems. One, Mr. Damodaran asked, how far India's carbon trading system is in progress? Who would like to answer this? How far India's carbon trading system is in progress?
So maybe sorry, Vinay sir, go on, please.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned in my presentation, it is very, very nascent stage. The ICM, it was announced in April for the first time, and April or March end, and then in June they issued the regulation rules, and they are in the at this time they are framing up, and I think the formation stage is still, and so it is expected probably next year it will be up and running. So Kaviraj, if you can add, Doctor.
Yes, sir. No, broadly, your understanding is right. Right now, they are conducting the workshops to get the feedback from the stakeholders. Last one was conducted in Delhi 2 weeks ago, and I think maybe this week it's happening in Mumbai. So they had planned for having these 2 workshops. I think they are ready with the draft that how the program will function. Right now, they are setting the rules for the third parties that who will accredit these third parties, how the competencies will be assessed. And I'm hopeful that early next year, this program should be up and running. But broadly, the infrastructure, in my understanding, is almost ready.
Okay, thank you. I request all participants to complete the poll, please. Yes, there is another question. Ranil Bhatia. Sir, go ahead, sir. Neil Bhatia.
Yeah, my voice is clear.
Yeah, yeah.
Sir, thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation by all the three faculty. My question is that, like we are working in engineering industries, especially my role is as a consultant is in the auto sector. So, a lot of LPG, HSD, PNG are power purchased from the electricity board used. So, any factor, I mean, carbon emission CO2 factor, like per megawatt, what is the CO2 emission in tons? So that type of any factors is given so that we can quantify in industries if so much consumption of electricity is there, so much consumption of LPG is there. For example, what is carbon emission in tons per kg of LPG or per kiloliter of HSD, like that?
Yeah.
I could take that. I mean, not specific to the Indian context, but you do have defaults in terms of carbon or emission intensity, it's called, for the fuel type that is used per ton of material that you're looking at.
Yes, sir.
So that would be either industry specific, but you're looking at automotive sector per se. And I am not familiar with the automotive sector in India. Maybe Vinay or Kaviraj is, but that is the carbon intensity default that they call default factors are available by either available through the industry associations themselves or on the basis of what benchmarks are available at the country. And the country benchmarks actually allocate the carbon intensity, because if you're using coal versus say a gas, then your carbon intensity would be different.
I can give you the source. The question is very, very important. The CEA, the Central Electricity Authority, publishes the grid emission factors every year. So you can visit their website and get those factors which are applicable. At the moment, I think there are two in the factors as relevance. One is called operating margin, which is all the plants which are operating and they are providing power and they have emission factors. So it's called operating margin, and there is a build margin. So these two emission factors which are published by CEA for every year in India. So I think the latest one is for 2022. If I able to, I can give you the link.
Yeah, but just to expand on that, these are, Mr. Bhatia, only related to the grid emission factors, what Vinay is saying. But if you want tonnage-specific information or product-specific information, which are called specific energy consumption, then these would be very different from what we have just mentioned. So that's a differentiation we are trying to make. So you will need to know the quantum of fuel that is consumed at the industry for the tons that is produced at the industry. And that would need to be monitored, unless you have, as I said, scheme-specific or industry-specific benchmarks. For grid, yes, I know, as Vinay has rightly pointed out, India does have, you don't have to calculate the grid emission factor or grid intensity, as it is called.
So we'll just take one more question, and we are already running late. Mr. Anand Kulkarni has asked how the PAT will be transformed from e-certs to carbon credit certificates. what are the scope will be covered in carbon credit trading system?
It's a good
Um,
question.
Yeah, actually, as I mentioned, this is provided in the draft paper, but I'm not sure whether that has been finalized. And what they are saying is that at the moment, whatever are the unsold ES certificates or unsold RECs can be converted into carbon equivalent carbon credits, and that will be done based on the equivalence factors. For example, for RECs is generally measured into megawatt hours, and that will be transferred depending on the year in which it was generated. You can apply the emission factors published by the CA authority, and then convert it into the emission reductions in terms of tons of CO2. Similarly, the ES certificates are also converted from I think they are measured in the TCOE, tons of oil equivalent.
Oil
And
equivalent.
yeah, oil equivalent, and that will be converted into respectively, based on the IPCC emission factors, which are published by IPCC for individual fuels. For example, coal or oil or natural gas or lignite or whatever you take. The IPCC has estimated the standard emission factors per ton of that fuel. So that will be used. You can convert it into the tons of CO2. So this is how it will
You
be.
also have, yeah. I also have, just sorry to expand and complement what Vinay said, you also have International Energy Agency, IEA, which has India-specific defaults that can be used. But having said that, the way I've understood it is the PAT, the REC, and the new ICM, which is the Indian carbon market, will all come and form a combined uniform carbon market. And these will go towards monitoring of what Kaviraj has already pointed out, towards monitoring the NDC targets, the national determined targets that India has taken upon itself under the Paris Agreement. So you have two goals, and there are, I think, two streams. One is the voluntary carbon market, which will go to domestic market consumption. And then you have the international market, which will have a different subscription as per Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So you can have two different offset generation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think if there are some more questions, we will send them reply by email or whatever it is. Arti,
I have,
please,
Mr. Sugantan, I have
Yeah.
given the link for.
Yeah, I saw that link, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is for what?
This is for the emission factors published by CE.
Okay. Thank you so much. Participants, please note down that link. That's the link for the baseline database and everything. Okay, thank you. So we have come to the conclusion, and I would like to thank the speakers, Mr. Vinay Deodar, Mr. Mayuresh, and Mr. Kaviraj Singh, for the wonderful presentation about GHG, the various issues and the procedures involved in 14064 and 65. Thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Anil Juari sir for the excellent coordination. So without him, we would not have got these best three speakers. So, and I would like to thank all the participants for the wonderful participation and the time you have spent with us. And please join us for more session. This month is quality month. We have a lot of programs coming up. Please join us and register in the website. And I would like to thank the back office team and CCC for making these sessions possible. And thank Mr. Rama Venugopal, the president, for the coordination. Unfortunately, she could not join today. And I would like to thank Mr. Atul Mathur from Pan India Association for joining this today's session. So thank you, one and all. Mr. Mathur, you would like to say some words?
Just a few thanks a lot, Dr. Kaviraj, Mayuresh, and Mr. Vinay. Actually, we have given us a lot of info to digest, and we need to again work towards a lot of streamlining certain elements certain elements that we need to start working on. Thank you, sirs. That's been a pleasure to hear you, and we're looking forward for a few more more sessions from all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great evening. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
all
you.
of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Link is not there. We are not able to see the link, please.
No,
Yeah,
is it-
Shrikant, we can just pass on the link.
Yeah, I will do that. I will do that, sir.
I hope the participants can get the link too.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
You can put it in the chat box so that we can.
Yes, Mr. Vake will do that.
Thank you very much, sir. Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Vake.